think we'll
the
just,
settling tank thing,
right,
the solution, all that from the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Let me know.
We're rolling.
Okay. We're rolling. You're rolling. Okay. Great. So yeah, explain the solution. So after we realize that we've got some sediment issues,
Right.
What's the solution?
So one of the first ideas that we came up with was can we implement a settling tank? So a settling tank is essentially, you can think of it as a big rectangle, and the length is defined by the settling velocity of the lightest particle, because it would take the longest time for the particle as the water is flowing from one end to the other to settle and to land at the bottom, what's called a collection, and before the water then goes out. And so we started thinking that was a really good idea. A lot of people thinking about this, a lot of research. What's really cool too is a lot of the engineers who were part of the team were, Pratt engineers. I'm an aerospace engineer. We had people who were mechanical engineers, civil engineers. A lot of times it's hard to have people who have the water hydrology experience, but this is still, so a lot of research on things that you may not necessarily have studied before or be familiar with. But as an engineer, you learn how to learn, or you learn how to research, and then you can kind of learn new things. And so it was really interesting as a kind of learning all these new things. However, when we started looking at the problem, you start getting really into the solution, and you have to realize what are your constraints. Where we're in a very mountainous area, and then you go look at the area and you look at the footprint and you look at how it's set up. There's no way we can fit a settling tank in this spot before this, in between the stream and the rest of the sedimentation boxes that are already designed. Okay, so this one kind of went out the door. And then we started thinking, well, what about something that's similar but that has a smaller footprint? Because our concern now is our constraint becomes the footprint. So we started looking at something else. It's like a sedimentation chamber. So it's like a circular footprint, and then it relies on internal channels. So it does the same thing, it just packages better. And so we started thinking about that, and that was also challenging, and a lot of different ideas came about, a lot of brainstorming. And then we started thinking, well, that's essentially, we're mitigating the problem, we're dealing with it. Can we go, or we're not mitigating, we're dealing with the problem. This is a containment action, how you call it in project terms. We're containing it. We're not preventing it. And so what happens if we look upstream, instead of focusing on how to take the dirt out once we get it, what can we do to prevent the sediment from coming into the water to begin with? And so for that, you do things like you plant trees, because if you have trees, the trees act as ties that prevent erosion from happening. You can also go build maybe some walls up along the way to prevent this stuff from coming in. So we just started thinking about all these different things. And we started really kind of leaning more towards that, because it's from a financial point of view, from a maintenance point of view, all the things that you really think about with these projects, or that we started thinking about, is we have to come up with something that is as simple, because we can make something really complicated and we can solve it, but when we're no longer there and it breaks down, who's going to fix it, right? And so that's what you think about, something called appropriate technologies. That's the terminology. Appropriate technologies means you're using technology that is available locally, and that the skills are also kind of local. You're not bringing in some high-tech German engineering solution that when you're gone, it just falls apart. And so, so we started thinking about this. We started thinking about something else. So if it starts raining, so with that in mind, then it came into something called a diversion channel, or a diversion valve was the next iteration. So this kept going for months. We would have a solution, we'd evaluate it, and we'd be like, what, this is wrong with it, or this doesn't work. So what do we do? And then the kind of the final, or one of the things we ended up on was something called a diversion valve. So it's essentially, we know, or we tried to address sedimentation. We tried to address how to prevent it, but it's really complicated because you have this really big basin of things. You can't go plant trees, that's going to take too long. How do you monitor it? So that also, the preventative thing could be done to a point, but we didn't feel confident enough that would solve it. And so we started thinking about, well, if it rains, what do we know about the problem? So let's step back again. What do we know? We know that it rains, and it rains for a certain amount of time, and we know that causes the sediment to come into the water, and then for about 4 hours, it'll be turbid. And then after about 4 hours, it goes back to being normal. Okay, so that's new information we have there now. So what happens if what we do is we don't collect water when it's raining, we shut off the access, and then we just wait. And then when it's clear again, then we collect the water. So we're essentially, there's many ways to solve an issue, right? And so we're preventing it from coming in. It's not going to, start polluting the filters or clog up the pumps and cause damage and all sorts of stuff. And also, it's not going to come and they're going to be drinking cloudy water. And we just have to figure out a way, but that's still another solution, right? So then we have to figure out, how do you make sure that when you have rain and it's cloudy or turbid and it has sediment, you shut it off? So again, the whole engineering thing, and you start out complicated. You're like, okay, well, we can figure out something that takes into account like the specific volume of the water and like how much the particles weigh, the density, and then maybe trigger something that makes it go, one way or something else. We started thinking about many things that would trigger that valve. So the whole point was, you have a valve, how do you trigger it? And then we also thought about, well, what if you have a close line from the top, and as soon as it starts raining, the village maintenance worker, which is the person that's the terminology for the person who takes care of the system, drops something, and then it hits something, and then it closes something, and then they have to go down and reset it. It's like, okay, well, that could work, but what happens if something happens with the line, and then that goes away? Well, what about like a button, like a radio transmission or something, and that then actuates something electric? And we thought, well, that's great. But then what happens when the electric thing breaks? Who fixes it? So many, many things, and we just it got really complicated. And so at the end of the day, just to get it to where it's solved, to avoid keeping going here, our solution was, well, this is too complicated for being sustainable. Like, it just doesn't meet. All these design ideas are great, but it doesn't work. What we ended up coming up with, and it's what the villagers were kind of doing, is whenever it starts raining, someone, the village maintenance worker, hurries up and goes down and disconnects the inlet pipe. And so he's doing that work. So the problem is getting addressed, but he's going there and disconnecting it. And then once the water is clear again, he goes back down and connects it. And so it's solved in a much simpler way. We just wanted a more elegant solution, but to be honest, this is more elegant because he just takes care of it. And he actually gets paid by the community to take care of the system. So it's his job to do other things. Well, this is just one more thing. He has to walk down, not everyone, just him, and he takes care of it. And so essentially what ended up happening was then that was the sedimentation part. And so my involvement was trying to figure that part out. And the other part was the bacteria, or the E. coli, which is a bacteria. And so how do we make sure that E. coli is not present? And so what we did with that was we took some measurements, we did some testing. We determined that if, we did some education to make sure that they don't have the cattle in the area, in the water drainage kind of shed, in the rain shed. And so then it doesn't drain into it. We make sure that they are following proper hygiene practices. We also educated them on the use of filters. So a lot of times what we realized when we did a community survey in one of these trips, and we realized for the data that we got is people we thought the problem was bigger than it was. And so again, it's all about numbers. Like, how do you make decisions? You use data. That's how we are as engineers. You can't just rely on a subjective thing. And we realized, yes, there's certain parameters that the World Health Organization and other companies or organizations put out there. But at the end of the day, if they say it has to be X amount, but you're doing a survey and that's not affecting people, and that's real life, why are you going to solve a problem that's not present? And we don't have unlimited resources. We're working with donor dollars, and we're working with time. Our time is a constraint as well. And so what we ended up doing was just realizing that it wasn't really a problem to the point that we thought it was a problem, and it was primarily affecting like children and elder people, and it was not really to a point where mortality was involved. They would have diarrhea every once in a while, but they knew what to do for diarrhea. They have a pharmacy, and they would buy the drugs for it. And they also kind of knew that if they did that, they should probably pay more attention to their water. So then they should probably be boiling. They have access to boil the water. They have access to some different different types of filters. There are ceramic filters that can be bought that are available locally. And so what we did was essentially just present them with the information and then present them with some potential solutions if they thought they needed them, instead of going and fixing a problem and spending thousands and thousands of dollars that would get us a marginal effect. It's like a cost-benefit analysis of what to do. And so, yeah, we traveled there. We did a lot of this stuff. A lot of it was community surveys to determine what to do for the next phase. And then the other really big part that I was focused on was when we had our initial design and the initial implementation of the project, we had selected a supplier based on the performance of the pump. We wanted one pump for each of the 3 stages. So one pump here, and one pump here. And we chose that supplier, again, because of the pump. And this is something that ties really well to like a Pratt or like a UTC. You don't want to do sole sourcing. Sole sourcing is not ideal if you can avoid it, because what happens when you have an issue with that supplier? You have no backup, and then your entire supply chain is compromised. Your product is compromised. And so, in hindsight, we should have maybe thought about that, but you make mistakes. So the team hadn't thought about that when they made the decision. And we started having issues with the supplier because one of the pumps failed. A pump failed, and they weren't responsive. They didn't show up on time to fix it. We did our own investigation of what was wrong. The technicians didn't seem to really understand the mechanics of the pump. And we were very displeased with how they handled the situation. The community was without water for like 2 months. They had to go back to what they did before. So there was a lot of like low morale within the team, within the community. Like, here we spent $100,000 and the project's not working. Like, what are we doing? And so what we went back and said is, okay, well, this is a huge thing. And it's actually kind of good that it happened now versus later, because we're still involved. Let's figure out a way to solve this for the short term, but also solve it so that if it happens again, it doesn't happen anymore, right? So we use something called in our ACE tools for a UTC, we use something called a dive. A dive is like you essentially do a root cause review, and then you put something in place, a corrective action, and then you make sure you ensure that it's all taken care of. So define, investigate, verify, and ensure. And so we did something similar for this. It's like, okay, let's figure out what the issue was. The issue was the supplier. We only had one supplier. We only were relying on, put our eggs in one basket. Let's figure out if there's other suppliers and what we can do with them. And so we did we put another bid out there. So we did a bid and said, hey, if you were to come into the system and wanted to replace this pump, how would you do it and what would you do? And so we got some responses from different suppliers, including a supplier that had initially bid on the initial bid back in the day. And they came back with a system that used 2 different pumps there instead of one, because they had different levels of power. They would use the 2 pumps, and we thought, well, that's actually kind of nice, because if one pump fails, the other pump is still there. It's more redundant than the system we have, and then they still get water. They get less volume of water, but they still get water, and then they can go fix it. So we're like, oh, actually it makes sense. And so we came back, we studied that with them. We went through that whole development process and making sure that it was designed properly. And one of the key things that we did on this last trip that we went there was to make sure that we could change one of the current pumps, put these 2 pumps in, and the system would operate properly. So testing out this new supplier relationship, making sure that they were not the only ones. So we actually got contact. That's a pump that's more prevalent in Nepal, and we got quotes from other suppliers. So we gave that information to the community. So if this supplier also is not responsive, they can go to others because they also sell this pump. So we kind of fixed that issue, right? It's a corrective action. And then we fixed this issue because these pumps work. And the other part of it was what happens with the solar panels. So everything kind of happened and fell through. So right before we left, right before we were supposed to travel, they had a big hailstorm, and the hailstorm damaged a bunch of solar panels. But it was actually kind of like a godsend, because we had to then go back to this other supplier and work with them to figure out how would you replace the solar panels. And so we ended up also doing that as a part of the system change. We replaced some of the solar panels at one of the stations with brand new panels of a different type. And we used those panels to fix the other panels in the other stations and took out the ones that were broken. And so then we tested that these new panels would work with the pumps. We tested the new pumps, and all that information we gave to the community. So going forward, if they have a pump failure issue, they have funds and they can go talk to the supplier and they can be fixed. If they have a solar panel issue, we know what panels to use, and they have that information. They have an operations and maintenance manual, and they can contact them and they can go buy them. So that's how we essentially closed the project. Was, we determined that the whole quality thing was a little bit more complicated, less complicated than we thought it was. We're making it too complicated. We educated them on hygiene and how to clean the water if they needed to, and then we built a better supply chain communication channel to make sure that the project could be sustainable. And then we did a formal handoff that was really cool. We did that. We filmed that in our documentary, the whole process of. So they have a gagri. A gagri is this stainless steel container that fits about 20 liters, and we painted it and put our names in it, and then gave it to them as a sign of here's us giving you the project. It's yours now. And then they had a little lamp, an oil lamp, and they also put their stuff on it the next day, and they gave it to us as a thank you, and they gave us some local hats. So, and they gave us the flowers and the whole the scarves. So, really cool experience. I cried, they cried, a bunch of people cried. It was kind of like an awesome conclusion. And at that point, from then on, we haven't really talked to them, and the system should be still operational. I haven't heard from them, so it must be. So that's kind of that.
That's great. That's fantastic. Thank you for
The whole-
guiding us through all that.
Yeah, I kind of wandered a bit.
Yeah.
Here and
So
there.
so now we'll just go to some more short-term.
Sure.
Just quick questions here. Why is it so important for UTC to be involved in a program like Engineer Without Borders?
Yep. So for a company like UTC who has a corporate social responsibility kind of mission, right? So UTC is very big. UTC obviously wants to do good. It's not all about just making money. It's about making sure that you give back to the community, and you give back to to your employees, right? And so it's kind of the both of those things kind of touch upon. And so with this, to be honest, that's one of the main drivers I've really. I whenever I talk to people about UTC, I always talk about how they have sponsored something like this and how they sponsor my involvement in it personally. So UTC's involvement is huge because they're making sure that their engineers or their employees, because it's not just engineers, there's a lot of people, are happy and have, fulfilled maybe that little purpose section in their heart, and are going to be more productive employees because they do that, and they're going to be more loyal employees because they do that. So I can assure you that my loyalty to UTC has been magnified by their support in something like this. And then you also get the benefit of obviously having the social impact. So now UTC knows that something they've provided money for has impacted the lives of 800 people in Nepal. I mean, how awesome is that, right? It's not just about making the jet engine or the air conditioning system or that, or it's in this day and age. I think companies are starting to really think about that social and that responsibility portion of it too.
And that seems to be, and I think we've touched on it a little bit, but that seems to be almost a recruiting tool, right?
Huge recruiting tool. When Pratt has become involved in this, they've actually been really close to some of the chapters that are university chapters. And our former president, Mike Ryder, he works at Pratt. He's recruited a bunch of people from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and from other chapters that were involved at the student level chapter. Why? Because it really allows you to build a relationship. So current day recruiting, it can happen a lot of ways, but I would say traditional recruiting, you go somewhere, you talk to someone for 1 hour, you think they're good, maybe you invite them to do an interview, and so you only have a limited amount of exposure to this person. If you've been working with a chapter, like a student chapter of Engineers Without Borders, and you've seen someone blossom as maybe the project lead, or maybe first they were, in a different position, they've kind of worked around. You've seen them more than just once, and you've built a relationship. By the time maybe you've even had them come in for an internship. Some people did that here, and then at the time they graduate, you're not just acting based off of a very little amount of time. You're acting based on a cumulative amount of time of seeing that person through different stages. So I think as a recruitment tool, it's very powerful because it allows you to build a better or a deeper connection with the prospective candidate. And you can talk about it very passionately with them, right? Like they know that they're doing it in school. It's something they love to do. They're a mechanical engineer. They want to come at Pratt or aerospace or whatever. And they know that they can still continue to do that while fulfilling maybe a different part of their career, professional career, right? So for me, that's huge. I think this field is amazing. I would love to, maybe in an ideal world, I would work full time in this kind of stuff. But I also have a passion for aerospace and for other things. And so it allows me to do both. It allows me to continue with my career and still do something to help people. And so UTC, allows us to do that, and that's really cool.
Excellent. Great answer. How has your involvement in EWB affected your work life? What lessons have you been able to apply to your day-to-day activities based on the work you're doing with EWB?
Oh, this one's huge. So when I became involved in EWB, I just decided I wanted to do this like full. I wanted to go all in. And so I applied to become the project lead. And I'm essentially the person in charge of coordinating everything to make sure the project becomes successful. And at the time, I was a design engineer, so working on different portions of the externals package for the PW1100 engine, now flying. So some of my parts are flying people. And I determined, hey, I kind of like this track of maybe, I like talking to people, I like bringing things together, so maybe like technical lead or project technical lead or something like that's what it was in my mind. And so EWB really helped me with that because I was a project manager. I mean, I was managing a project with resources, volunteers, which is actually harder than full-time employees, right? So I had volunteers, I had a budget, and I had a schedule, and I had deliverables, and I had reviews, and I had the whole thing, something that I wouldn't be exposed at a company like Pratt until I'm at the CIPT level maybe, so something that would take many more years of experience. I was getting it, and I was getting it in real life. And so I think it was a great way for both things. I was able to take tools I learned as a project manager with actual work experience, like life experience, and apply them to Pratt I became a design lead. So I was overseeing other people's designs as well as myself. And then same thing, things I would learn at Pratt and tools I would learn or processes, apply them to EWB. So it was great both ways to kind of build my tool set of, I would call it project management or technical management, and just not just that, but also the soft skills, right? So you have to deal with conflict resolution. You have to deal with how do you keep people engaged and motivated. And, a lot of that stuff is harder than the actual engineering. The engineering is easy. I mean, you can come up with a design and solve something, but it's whether that's appropriate, whether that's taking into account the interest of all the stakeholders, which involve the community. It's all this other soft skill stuff. The culture, making sure you're taking into account their culture. That's the stuff that you don't really learn in school, and that by having something like this, it makes it so much more valuable, and you can bring it into the workplace, right? You can be a better employee by knowing these things.
Excellent, great stuff. Why are engineers important at UTC and in the world?
Engineers are important because they solve problems, and the world and UTC has a lot of problems. Like that's the nature of engineering, or the nature of things. I think, we start having more and more complex things, more and more complex engines, more and more complex systems, and so engineers have that critical mind, or that critical thinking that looks at a problem and then comes up with solutions, and then executes on that to solve them. And so I think they're a very large portion of UTC, because a lot of the stuff we deal with is very technical, and without the engineers, you wouldn't be able to have products, right? They design it, and they execute, and they solve it, with a lot of help from other people too, right?
Yes, exactly. So volunteering in terms of UTC as a whole, right? We've got EWB, we've got all these other things. Would you say that UTC is definitely that volunteering is important for UTC and for the employees of UTC?
I would say so. I'd say that UTC highly encourages it. They have a volunteer match. They have a volunteer match website, or a link to it, where you can go in and you can look at all sorts of things. I mean, your interests can be very varied, and you can go through UTC and kind of figure out what kind of stuff to do. Do you want to be a mentor in a high school or a middle school? Do you want to get involved with Habitat for Humanity? Do you want to get involved with Relay for Life? They're a huge sponsor of Relay for Life here in Connecticut, and they do a lot of activities. And so really you can pick and choose, and if it's not there, you can add it, and you can do it yourself. They also have they have a gift matching program, where if you pick a organization of your choice, they'll double what you place up to a certain value. And so, I think it's a really neat organization, because it encourages that. Not only do they allow it, but they encourage it. And then I think for a lot of the employees, that's huge. I mean, for me, that's huge. That's one of the reasons I've stayed with UTC, is because it encourages me to do that, and it allows me to do that. And so then I can really kind of make sure I fulfill that portion of what I want to do.
Excellent. If people want to get involved with either your chapter of EWB or EWB, in another part of the country or the world, how would they go about doing that?
So there's a website called ewbusa.org, org, I believe, or you can just Google Engineers Without Borders USA, and that website will have links to different chapters. So depending on what area you're at. So I used to be here in Hartford, and so Hartford Professional Chapter. But if now I'm in Colorado, and there's a bunch of chapters in the area. There's a Denver chapter, there's Boulder, there's, and so really you can go through there and you can kind of find out your location. If you want to be involved in a professional chapter, then you can go to your chapter's website and find out when they're meeting next, for example. You can also get involved with student chapters, and then you can be like a mentor for a school or get engaged that way. And then here, for example, at Pratt, you can reach out. I'm not sure. There must be a link somewhere in our interest site. But if you also just send an email to the current chapter president for Engineers Without Borders, Tom Rebecki, he's an engineer at Pratt. So if you look him up, you can send him an email, and I'm sure he'll get you involved.
Excellent. What are we missing, Victoria?
I would love something about kind of your relationship with the people in Nepal, in the community that kind of
Okay.
You guys work with.
Okay, I'll do that.
Hold
While we're
one second.
paused, can Linda exit this room now?
Yep.
And then I think
Yeah,
I'll
you
do.
go, it's
I didn't really touch in, so let me do that as well.
Thank you
The
so
whole.
Thanks, Linda.
So how I ended up,
So you s-
See ya.
how I think I touched a little bit on how it helped me both ways,
Right.
but I got some more on how like project management at EWB took me to where I am like now. So your first part was what?
just about the relationship with the community.
The relationship with the community. Yep.
and all of that.
Yep. So one of the most kind of rewarding things about a project like this is the relationship you build with different people, whether that's with your peers, whether that's with the community, whether that's with the organization that helps you, because you're doing something that kind of impacts people at that level. And a lot of times you're traveling in some precarious situations, you end up bonding with people, right? And so one of the key things there was the community and how they took us. And so the community is super helpful. They may not have all the financial resources because that's one of the reasons we're helping them, but they were very hospitable. They put us up in like a community area, and they would every morning have someone cooking for us, making breakfast. They would have, the women or some of the people in the community that traditionally do the dishes would be doing the dishes and figure out if we needed help with our laundry. Whatever they could do that was within their means, they would do. When we had that celebration at the end, when we handed the project over, they, went out and cooked for us this huge meal, and they had this local wine called Raxi that tastes really strong, and they kept just refilling your cup, and you realize oh my God. So that part is really cool, and that relationship you build with them, because they referred to us, and I didn't really like it too much, but that's what they said. They kind of started singing. They made a song, and they said in kind of like broken English, they're like that they thought we were like gods. That's what they told us, because we have given them something that is needed for their life, water. It's one of the most important things, and we had provided water to them, and they said, you guys are like gods to us. And we're like, no, but thank you. So yeah, that relationship was really neat, and I've still kept in touch with a few of them. So I became like Facebook friends with some of them. Sometimes I get Messenger, Facebook Messenger messages and in broken English, and try to kind of see what's going on. So it's really cool community.
All right. Anything else, Victoria?
So let me go about this one about
Okay.
the project.
Yep.
Yep. So one of the things I learned there in the whole involvement with the project was I started picking up a lot of project management skills. And I started managing a project. I did it for 3 years, and there's a lot of things I learned. I didn't do it all right from the beginning because I didn't have that training. So I obviously learned through failure a lot of times, and started kind of realizing, I really enjoy this portion of this, which is the project management, right? So bringing all the pieces together. You have the technical stuff, you have, but making sure that everything works together to get to a deliverable that meets the requirements that you said you were doing, right? And so I started really liking that, and I started thinking, is there a way I can transition my career into something like that? So I was still in an engineering design group, and I started thinking, can I get into something, and Pratt calls it an IPT lead, or can I get into a project management role or something like that? And that's how I ended up where I am now. So a position came up in Colorado at United Technologies Aerospace Systems in their seating division. So we do cabin attendant seats, flight attendant seats. and a position came up that was a program manager, and so I started talking. I actually sent a link to the person that was listed as hiring manager. I sent a message through our communication software, like our internal communication software. And I said, hey, you know, this is me. I kind of gave her a little tidbit. And I'm really interested in kind of this position. It looks really cool. I don't really have the background that you guys are listing there because I've not been a project manager in the sense of a professional career. However, you know, I'm a design lead and I work in a technical sense, and I have this experience that I'd love to talk to you about real project management on something that affected people. And so she was really interested, and we set up like a meeting right away, and we talked about it. And what did I pitch to her? I'm a project manager. Look at this example. I've managed this project from start to end, or from start, at that point we hadn't closed it yet, but from this point to this point, I manage money, I manage people, I'm, you know, schedule, and all this sorts of things. And she really liked that. And I ended up getting flown out for an interview, I think within a week or two. And again, in the interview process, that's one of the things I focused about, was giving that as an example of how I would do this, even though it wasn't in my Pratt resume, right. But I still in my resume, you know, it's huge for me, but it's not Pratt, or it's not professional. And I think they really liked it. They actually offered me the job, even though I didn't have formal project management experience. We'll call it formal. And that was one of the things that they told me, you know, we really were impressed by your work at Engineers Without Borders. And so now I work as a program manager. I was here in Farmington this week getting my project management professional certification training to become PMP certified. And this all came about, to be honest, through how I got involved with EWB, how Pratt sponsored it, how I learned about that, how I used that in an interview and changed jobs within UTC. And I think it's really value added for UTC to have someone that has that experience, and now I'm, you know, using it for work. So anyway, I think that's really cool.
And it's how you got filmed right now.
And it's how I got filmed. Yeah, no, it's really crazy, I think. I mean, that's why I'm a project manager. It's really crazy.
So when you heard about this doing this interview today,
yeah,
an hour ago or whatever it was, was there anything you thought we were going to talk about that we didn't, or anything that you wanted to say that I didn't give you the chance to say?
I don't think so. No, I think I mentioned. I mean, I mentioned why I do it, right? I mentioned why I think Pratt really pushes, or not pushes for it, but they really encourage it. And it's, I mean, stuff like this, right? You guys are doing a video and going to share it with the rest of UTC on something that Pratt or UTC does. I think it's awesome. I mean, to be honest, that's why I think UTC is a great place to work at. You know, I don't know of a lot of other people, other companies that have the chance to travel to Nepal for 2 weeks and, you know, outside of your regular vacation time, right? So they work with you, and it's a very management-specific decision, but allows you to do that, you know, and take time off and really give back. And not have to use your own personal vacation time, for example, in my case, you know, or some of the cases we've worked with, right? So the fact that they do that, I mean, really shows they care about you as a person. They want you to be happy. And I can assure you that me happy produces a lot more than me not happy, right? So I'm being super productive at work. I'm very loyal to the company, and I'm very happy when I do these things. So, I mean, it's a win-win. Why wouldn't you do it, right? You keep the employee happy. It's a great tool. It's a great marketing tool as well, right? And then you also do good. So you do good, you can take credit for it, and then you keep your employees happy. I don't know.
That's great.
That's cool.
That's very cool. All right. We good, Victoria?
I'm good. Sorry.
Did I bore you guys yet?
No,